What happens when this man who promised to love you forever, the man whose baby you are carrying, throws you out onto the street? For Sarah Jensen. 8 months pregnant, this nightmare became her reality. Her husband, Mark, didn't just ask for a divorce. He presented a DNA test proving the baby wasn't his and handed her a suitcase. As the locks on her own home clicked shut, she watched another woman, his mistress Camila, move in sleep in her bed and prepare a nursery that wasn't for her child. But the biggest betrayal was yet to come, hidden in a single court-ordered envelope that would expose a lie so dark it would destroy them all. The scent of brewing coffee and old money always reminded Sarah Jensen of her home. The sprawling Victorian on Ashworth Drive wasn't just a house. It was a legacy left to her by her grandfather. It was where she and her husband Mark had planned their lives. It was where she was supposed to bring home their son Leo, whose tiny clothes were already folded in the nursery upstairs. At 8 months pregnant, Sarah moved with a heavy, swaying grace. But for the past 3 weeks, the house had felt cold. Mark, a man whose laughter once filled these halls, had become distant, his voice a clipped monotone. He blamed it on stress at his investment firm, on the market, on anything but the truth. The truth arrived on a Tuesday, packed in a single, menacing FedEx envelope. Sarah was arranging flowers when Mark came home early. He wasn't alone. With him were his mother Emma and a man in a stiff suit Sarah didn't recognize. "Mark, what's going on? Is everything okay?" Sarah asked, a hand instinctively going to the tight drum of her belly. "Sarah, please sit down," Mark said. He didn't look at her. He looked at a spot on the wall just over her shoulder. "Emma, what is this?" Sarah's pulse began to thrum with a low, primal fear. Emma Jensen, a woman who prided herself on her composure, simply pursed her lips and stared at Sarah's stomach with unconcealed disdain. The man in the suit stepped forward, placing a briefcase on the coffee table. "Mrs. Jensen, my name is Arthur Harrison. I am Mr. Jensen's legal counsel. We are here to discuss a matter of significant delicacy." "I don't understand." "A lawyer," Mark finally met her eyes. They were dead. All the warmth, the love she had known for 7 years was gone. "We know Sarah." "Know what?" He slid a document from the FedEx envelope and tossed it onto the table. It slid across the polished mahogany and stopped at her hand. "We know." Mark said, his voice cracking with a manufactured rage, "that the baby isn't mine." The words didn't compute. It was as if he'd spoken in a foreign language. What are you talking about, Mark? That's insane. This is your son." "Stop lying," he roared, and Sarah flinched. "I had my doubts. You've been distant, secretive with your phone. I've been pregnant, I've been tired and nauseous. What are you talking about? This," he jabbed a finger at the paper. "It's a prenatal paternity test from Advanced Paternity Solutions. I had a sample from your OB/GYN's office tested against my own." Sarah's mind raced. "Dr. Reed, she would never... How did you... This is impossible." "The results are 0% probability, Sarah. 0. All this time you've been lying. Whose is it? Was it that guy from your old office, Daniel? Was it... Mark, no," she cried, tears welling. "This is a mistake. It's a fake. I have never ever been with anyone else. You know that." She turned to her mother-in-law. "Emma, please, you know me." Emma sniffed. "I thought I did. But to bring this shame into my son's house, it's despicable." The house. The words hung in the air. "Mr. Harrison," Mark said, turning his back on his weeping wife, Please explain the terms." The lawyer cleared his throat, unmoved. "Mrs. Jensen, under the circumstances of this profound marital infidelity, Mr. Jensen is filing for divorce. Furthermore, as this house is his primary residence—" "It's my house!" Sarah shrieked, struggling to her feet. "It was my grandfather's. It's in my name." "Actually," Mark said, a cold, thin smile touching his lips, "you added me to the deed 6 months ago, when we refinanced for the nursery renovation, and as you have broken the marital contract, I am petitioning to have you removed immediately." It was a nightmare. This wasn't happening. "Mark, please," she begged, clutching his arm. "Don't do this. I don't know what this paper is, but it's a lie. I swear to you, I swear on our baby's life." He ripped his arm from her grasp, his face contorted in disgust. "Don't you dare call him ours. My mother has packed a bag for you. It's by the door. You have 10 minutes to leave. If you are not gone, I will have you removed for trespassing." "Trespassing, Mark 1, am 8 months pregnant. It's raining. Where am I supposed to go?" "You should have thought of that," he spat, "before you slept with another man." Emma walked to the front door and opened it, letting in a rush of cold, damp air. A single gray suitcase sat on the porch. 10 minutes. Sarah," Mark repeated. Sarah looked from his dead eyes to his mother's smug face to the lawyer's impassive stare. They had planned this. This was an execution. Numb, shivering, she walked past them. She didn't look at the nursery. She couldn't. She grabbed the handle of the suitcase, her own suitcase, one they had taken to Italy for their honeymoon, and stepped out into the rain. The heavy oak door, the one her grandfather had carved, clicked shut behind her. The deadbolt slid home. She was in an instant homeless. She stumbled down the walkway, the rain soaking her hair, her thin maternity shirt clinging to her cold skin. She made it to the sidewalk before her legs gave out. She collapsed onto the wet grass, a primal scream of disbelief and agony tearing from her throat as she watched the lights of her own home, her son's home, glow warmly against the dark, wet night. The next 48 hours were a blur of shame and sterile procedure. Sarah's first call was to her best friend, Jessica Riley. Jessica, a fiercely loyal paralegal, picked her up from the curb, her face a mask of murderous rage, and took Sarah back to her small one-bedroom apartment. "This is illegal, Sarah," Jessica kept repeating, wrapping her in a blanket. "He can't just throw you out. Inheritance premarital assets, even if he's on the deed. A judge would laugh him out of court, and a fake DNA test. Who the hell is Advanced Paternity Solutions?" "I don't know," Sarah whispered, her body shaking from shock. He was so sure. He hated me, Jess. The look in his eyes. He's been poisoned," Jessica said, her voice grim. "This has to be her." Her. Camila Vance, his new executive assistant, the one he's been having late-night strategy meetings with for a month, the one I saw him with at the Nightingale last week, holding her hand under the table. Sarah's blood ran cold. She had voiced her suspicions, but Mark had brushed them off. "She's just an assistant baby. You're just pregnant and hormonal. I'm focused on us, on the baby." It was all a lie. The distance, the coldness. It wasn't stress. It was guilt. "He's not just cheating Sarah," Jessica said, her eyes narrowing. "He's coordinating. This was a coup." The next day, Sarah's lawyer, a different, more aggressive one, recommended by Jessica's firm, confirmed her fears. "He's filed an emergency motion," her lawyer, a sharp woman named Maria Sanchez, explained over the phone. "He's claiming spousal fraud and emotional distress, petitioning for an emergency dissolution and exclusive occupancy of the residence. He's using the DNA report as his primary evidence. It's a smear campaign, Sarah, and he's moving fast. Maria advised her to stay put, to not engage. They would file a counter-motion, but the courts were slow. Mark was using his money to make them slower. But Sarah couldn't stay put. She had to see. 2 days after her eviction against Jessica's advice, she took a taxi to Ashworth Drive. She told herself she was just going to check the mail. She didn't even get to the mailbox. The front door was open. A moving van was parked in the driveway. But they weren't moving things out. They were moving things in. A sleek, modern black sofa was being carefully maneuvered through the door. Her traditional, comfortable furniture, the chairs she and Mark had picked out together, was piled on the front lawn, covered by a blue tarp like garbage. And directing the movers with a latte in one hand and a clipboard in the other was a woman Sarah had only seen in pictures. Camilla Vance. She was tall, with a cascade of fiery red hair and a body that was all sharp, aggressive angles. She wore high-heeled boots and a tight black dress utterly out of place for a moving day. She looked, Sarah thought, with a sickening lurch, like she was posing. Then Camilla saw her. The taxi was idling at the curb. Sarah was frozen in the back seat. A slow, venomous smile spread across Camilla's face. She didn't wave. She didn't flinch. She took a deliberate sip of her latte, raised her sunglasses to rest on her head, and gave a small, mocking tilt of her head. It was a gesture of pure, unadulterated triumph. "Ma'am, you want me to wait?" the taxi driver asked, looking nervously between the two women. Sarah couldn't speak. Her breath was trapped in her lungs. This woman, this stranger, was in her house throwing out her life. And Mark was letting her. As if summoned, Mark appeared in the doorway. He put his arms around Camilla's waist from behind, nuzzling her neck. He looked happy, lighter than he had in months. He kissed her a deep, passionate kiss right on the porch where he and Sarah used to drink tea. Then he saw the taxi. He saw Sarah. His face hardened. He didn't look guilty. He looked annoyed. He pointed a finger at the car. "Get out of here, Sarah. It's over. Stop harassing us." "Harassing?" Sarah finally whispered the word, a dry rasp. Camilla laughed. It was a high, bright sound that cut through the air. She leaned back against Mark's chest, looking every bit the lady of the manor. "Driver." Sarah choked out, "Please, just go. Go now." As the car pulled away, Sarah looked back. Camilla had walked over to the pile of Sarah's furniture. She picked up a small framed photo Sarah and Mark on their wedding day, looked at it for a moment, and then casually tossed it into a nearby trash bin. That night, the full weight of the conspiracy hit Sarah. This wasn't just an affair. This was a meticulous, cruel, and calculated replacement. Camilla hadn't just stolen her husband. She was actively erasing Sarah's existence. She had moved in the day after Sarah was kicked out. The bags were already packed. The new furniture already ordered. They hadn't just waited for her to leave. They had pushed her using a lie so monstrous it had shattered her world. Sarah wept, not for the man she had lost, that man was a ghost, but for the sheer intimate cruelty of the betrayal. She wasn't just a wife replaced. She was a problem that had been solved. The next 3 weeks were the longest of Sarah's life. She existed in the suffocating limbo of Jessica's spare room, surrounded by legal documents she could barely read through her tears. Maria Sanchez, her lawyer, was a bulldog. She'd immediately filed for an emergency hearing demanding a court-ordered paternity test and challenging the validity of the document from Advanced Paternity Solutions. The response from Mark's lawyer was swift and brutal. Sarah was unstable, delusional, and this was a desperate attempt to extort a man she had deeply wronged. They provided a notarized affidavit, supposedly from the lab director, a Dr. Alastair Finch, attesting to the test's accuracy. "They're building a wall of lies," Maria said, her voice tight with anger. "And they're using Mark's money to make it look solid. The judge won't rule on the eviction until the paternity claim is settled. They're trying to run out the clock. They want you to have this baby while you're technically homeless and declared an unfaithful wife. They're trying to take your son, Sarah." That was the sentence that changed everything. The fog of grief evaporated, replaced by a cold, crystalline rage. They weren't just taking her house. They were coming for her child. "No," Sarah said the word like a stone. "That will not happen." The stress, however, was taking its toll. 2 days later, a full week before her due date, the first sharp, crippling pain shot through her back. It was 3 a.m. Jessica, pale with panic, broke every speed limit, getting her to St. Jude's Hospital. The birth was nothing like she had planned. There was no soft music, no supportive husband holding her hand. There was only the harsh glare of fluorescent lights, the sterile smell of antiseptic, and the steady, impersonal beeping of the fetal heart monitor. Jessica was there, her hand a lifeline in the darkness, but Sarah had never felt so utterly alone. It was a long, grueling 18-hour labor. She was exhausted, terrified, and fueled by nothing but adrenaline and fury. And then, at 9:27 p.m., after a final tearing scream, he was here. A nurse laid the baby on her chest. He was small, red, and screaming, and he was the most beautiful thing she had ever seen. "Hello, Leo," she whispered, tears streaming down her face. "Hello, my little lion. It's just you and me, Doctor." Evelyn Reed, the OB-GYN, who had been with Sarah from the beginning, was cleaning up. She had been named in Mark's affidavit as the source of the prenatal sample, a charge she had vehemently denied. "He's perfect, Sarah," Dr. Reed said, her voice soft, but laced with steel. "And he is the spitting image of his father." Sarah looked. She had been afraid to, but now she saw it. It wasn't just wishful thinking. Leo had Mark's dark, thick hair, the exact shape of his eyes, and even in his tiny newborn face, the distinct cleft in his chin. He really does," Sarah breathed. The sight of it was both a comfort and a fresh, stabbing pain. Dr. Reed washed her hands and turned to Sarah. "I've already spoken to your lawyer. The sample Mark's team procured from my office. It never existed. We have a chain of custody for all amniotic fluid samples. They are logged barcoded and sent only to the hospital's internal lab or a court-approved facility. Advanced Paternity Solutions is not on that list. What they have is a forgery, or a fabrication, or a bribe." Jessica, who had been quietly watching from the corner, suddenly snapped her fingers. "The lab, Sarah. The name. Advanced Paternity Solutions. I've been digging. It's a shell. The address is a UPS store in Delaware. The website was created 6 weeks ago. It's a ghost." A nurse came in to take Leo for his newborn screening. As she left, Sarah looked at Jessica. "He's not just a fool, Jess. He's a willing participant. He wanted to believe it. So we give him the truth," Jessica said, her paralegal mind whirring. "We give him the one thing he can't deny. We don't wait for the court order." "What do you mean?" "I mean, while you're here, we get the real test," Jessica said. "The hospital-grade, court-admissible, ironclad, you are the father test. We get a kit. We swab Leo, and we serve Mark Jensen with the results." A slow, hard smile touched Sarah's lips. "Serve him? I don't want him served. I want him present. He has to do it. He has to swab his own cheek and see the results with his own lying eyes. That, Maria Sanchez said from the doorway holding a bouquet of flowers, can absolutely be arranged. And we'll make it a court order. He'll be compelled to appear for the sample collection. He can't run from this, Sarah. Sarah looked down at the empty blanket in her arms, waiting for her son to return. Her little lion. Good, Sarah said, her voice devoid of any of its previous weakness. Let him run. Let's see how fast he is. I'm not the one running anymore. I'm the one hunting. While Sarah was in labor, Mark and Camila were at a charity gala. Camila was incandescent, in a backless emerald gown. Diamonds. Sarah's diamonds, a gift from her grandmother, sparkling at her throat. Mark, in a tailored tux, was the picture of a man unbound. He smiled, he laughed, he networked. He felt free, but the freedom he was beginning to learn had a cost. And Camila was an expensive, exhausting warden. Life with Camila was not the easy, passionate paradise he had envisioned. It was a performance. She was obsessed with appearances, with upgrading every aspect of the life he and Sarah had built. The house was a construction zone of cold, modern art gray walls and sharp-edged furniture he was terrified of scratching. She was also deeply pathologically insecure. She would fly into a jealous rage if he so much as glanced at another woman. She obsessively monitored his phone, his emails, his credit card statements. The control he thought he was escaping had only returned in a more volatile form. And she was vicious about Sarah. A week after Sarah's eviction, Mark had walked into the nursery. He'd found Camila directing two men to remove the crib, the one he and Sarah had spent a weekend assembling, and the rocking chair. "What are you doing?" He'd asked, a strange, hollow feeling in his gut. "Redecorating, darling," Camila chirped, not looking at him. "This wallpaper is tragic. I'm thinking a home gym, or perhaps a meditation space. We certainly don't need a room for it." "For it, the bastard," she said, her voice casual. "You can't possibly want a reminder of her betrayal in the house, do you? We're starting fresh, no baggage." He'd wanted to argue, to say that it was still a baby, but he'd remained silent. To argue would be to admit doubt, and to admit doubt would be to admit he had just detonated his entire life for nothing. He was pot committed. He had to believe he was the victim. But the doubts were festering. His mother Emma, who had been Camila's biggest champion, was now seeing the viper she had welcomed into the family. Camila treated Emma not as a mother-in-law, but as staff. She was dismissive, rude, and openly mocked Emma's provincial taste. One afternoon, Emma, searching for a misplaced checkbook in Mark's home office, stumbled upon a filing cabinet Camila had fastidiously kept locked. She'd found the key under the desk blotter. Inside, she didn't find financial documents. She found a folder labeled SJ Project. Her blood chilled. She opened it. It wasn't just the FedEx envelope. It was invoices. One was from a private investigator dated 2 months prior for a full background check on Sarah Jensen. Another was for a data security firm. And a third, for $15,000, was from a company called Digitalis Creative. The memo line read, "Bespoke document creation and letterhead." The date on the invoice was 3 days before the date on the Advanced Paternity Solutions report. Emma felt the floor drop out from under her. She confronted Mark that night, her face ashen. "Who is this woman, Mark? What have you done? Mother, what are you talking about? Camila is wonderful." "She is a con artist," Emma hissed, shoving the invoices into his chest. "Bespoke document creation, $15,000. Does that sound like a late-night strategy meeting to you? She paid someone to make that report. She invented it." Mark looked at the papers, his mind refusing to connect the dots. That's for her business. A new logo, she told me. And you believed her, Emma cried. You threw your pregnant wife, the mother of your child, into the street for a woman who bills for bespoke documents. You are a fool, Mark, a blind, arrogant fool. He wanted to yell to defend Camilla, to defend himself, but he couldn't. The doubt was no longer a fester. It was a chasm. He thought of Sarah's face as he'd kicked her out. The genuine, agonizing confusion, the oath she swore on the baby's life. He retreated to his office, the invoices trembling in his hand. He poured a stiff whiskey. He needed to prove his mother wrong. He needed to prove he was right. He pulled up the website for Digitalis Creative. It was real, a high-end graphic design firm. He called the number. A man with a smooth voice answered. Digitalis, this is Julian. Yes, I'm calling about an invoice for Camilla Vance. Ah, yes, Miss Vance, a very specific client. Julian said, his voice wary. Is there an issue with the payment? No, I'm her partner, Mark Jensen. I'm handling the books. I needed clarification on the service. Bespoke document creation. What exactly did that entail? There was a pause. Sir, our client agreements are confidential. This is a $15,000 charge. Mark snapped, his voice hard. If you can't tell me what it was for, I'm initiating a credit card chargeback and reporting your firm for fraud. The threat worked. Julian sighed. Look, Mr. Jensen, your partner was very clear. She needed a document created with the utmost discretion. She provided a sample from a medical lab, a real one from St. Jude's, I believe, and asked us to replicate the letterhead, the fonts, the entire template, but with the name Advanced Paternity Solutions. She then had us populate specific fields. We're designers, sir. We aren't responsible for how our clients use our designs. The whiskey glass slipped from Mark's hand, shattering on the hardwood floor. He stared at the puddle of amber liquid spreading across the wood. She provided a sample. Replicate the letterhead. Populate specific fields. It was all a lie. It was all a lie. He had destroyed his family. He had kicked out his pregnant wife. For a lie. He was still standing there, staring at the broken glass when the doorbell rang. It rang twice, sharp and impatient. He stumbled to the door and pulled it open. A stern-looking man in a suit stood on his porch. Mark Jensen. Yes, you've been served. The man handed him a thick envelope and walked away. Mark's hands were numb. He ripped it open. It wasn't from a lawyer. It was from the Family Court of California. It was a court order compelling him to appear at St. Jude's Hospital maternity ward in 12 hours. The purpose: to provide a DNA sample via buccal swab for a court-mandated paternity test. Attached to the order was another document. A birth announcement. Leo Riley Jensen, born October 18th. Weight 7 lbs, 2 osas. Mother Sarah Jensen. He sank to his knees in the foyer, the shards of glass from the whiskey tumbler digging into his trousers. He hadn't just lost his wife. He had a son. A son he had abandoned. A son who was born while he was drinking champagne with the woman who had orchestrated his entire ruin. Mark didn't sleep. He sat in the cold, unfamiliar living room, the court order in one hand and the invoice from Digitalis Creative in the other. He felt a hollowness so profound, it was almost a physical pain. He was a man who had murdered his own life. He waited. At 6 a.m., Camilla descended the stairs, yawning, wrapped in a silk robe, Sarah's robe. She smiled when she saw him, a sleepy, sensual smile. "Darling, you're up early," she purred, walking over to kiss him. He put a hand up, and she stopped her smile, faltering. "Mark, what's wrong?" He didn't speak. He just held up the 2 pieces of paper, the invoice and the court order. Her eyes darted between them. The color drained from her face. She recognized the invoice instantly. The blood in her veins turned to ice. "Mark, I can explain." "Can you," his voice was a dead rasp, "can you explain bespoke document creation? Can you explain advanced paternity solutions? Or should I call Julian at Digitalis Creative? We had a lovely chat last night. He told me all about how you replicated a template, how you populated the fields." Camilla's facade of sleepy innocence vanished, replaced by a cold, hard glare. "You had no right to go through my things." "And you had no right," and he roared, finally surging to his feet. "You had no right to do this to my family, to my wife." "Your wife!" She scoffed, a bitter laugh escaping her. "The pathetic little mouse you couldn't wait to get rid of. Don't you dare put this on me, Mark. You wanted an excuse. You were bored. You were weak. I just gave you the key. You were the one who turned it." You lied to me," he stammered, the reality still too vast to comprehend. "You made me. I threw my pregnant wife. I have a son. He was born yesterday, while I was with you." "Oh, boo-hoo," Camilla snapped, crossing her arms. "You think I care about your pathetic little family. You think this was about you. You were a tool, Mark. A big, dumb, handsome, and incredibly simple tool." Mark recoiled, as if struck. "A tool? I left my life for you. I gave you everything. You gave me her house." Camilla spat, her eyes flashing with a terrifying, unfamiliar fire. "You gave me her diamonds. That's all you were ever good for. A means to an end." "What end? What are you talking about?" Before she could answer, the doorbell rang again. Mark, dazed, walked to the door. It was Jessica Riley, and behind her were 2 police officers. "Mark Jensen," Jessica said, her voice like ice. "The officers are here to keep the peace. I'm here on behalf of Sarah Jensen to retrieve her personal effects, including her grandmother's jewelry." She looked past Mark's shoulder at Camilla, who was standing frozen in the foyer, still clutching the silk robe. "And I see you have it," Jessica said, nodding at the diamond necklace. "Take it off." "You can't be serious," Camilla snarled. "Take it off now, or Officer Miller here will arrest you for felony theft." Camilla, her face a mask of pure hatred, fumbled with the clasp and threw the necklace at Jessica. "You think you've won, you little bitch!" "This isn't a game," Jessica said calmly. "The court order for the DNA test is at 9 a.m. Don't be late, and Mark Maria Sanchez will be serving you with the real lawsuit this afternoon. Fraud, conspiracy, forgery, illegal eviction. We're not just taking the house back, Mark. We're taking everything." The officers stepped inside. "Sir, we've also been asked to inform you," one of them said, "that a temporary restraining order has been granted. As this property is contested and was Miss Jensen's primary residence, you are required to vacate the premises. You have 1 hour." "Vacate," Mark echoed, his world tilting. This is my house." "It's Sarah's house," Jessica corrected. "And she's coming home. With her son." Mark and Camilla stood in silence as Jessica, with a grim-faced officer, as an escort, went upstairs to pack Sarah's remaining valuables. The illusion was shattered. The fantasy life Mark had bought with his cruelty had just been foreclosed on. He looked at Camilla. Her face was no longer beautiful. It was twisted into a grotesque mask of rage and desperation. "You," he whispered, "who are you?" Camilla let out a sound that was half sob, half laugh. "You still don't get it, do you? You are so stupid. You never even asked me my real name." What are you talking about? Vance is my mother's maiden name. My full name is Camilla Roberts." The name meant nothing to Mark. So, she screamed, the sound echoing in the now empty house. "You're just like him, just as ignorant, just as selfish Richard Jensen. Sarah's sainted father. The man who built this whole dynasty you were so proud to marry into. Ask him who Roberts is." "Sarah's father is dead," Mark said, confused. "Exactly, and he died with his reputation intact. He died a family man, while my mother, his first family, died in a one-bedroom apartment in Fresno, working herself to death as a waitress." The pieces began to click into place, forming a picture of horrifying generational malice. "My mother was Angela Roberts," Camilla said, her voice dropping to a low, trembling hiss. "She was engaged to Richard Jensen. He was a nobody then. They were in love. And then he met Sarah's mother with her family money and her connections. He dropped my mother, who was 3 months pregnant with me, like she was garbage. He paid her off, told her to disappear. And he built his perfect little life with his perfect little family and his perfect, precious daughter, Sarah." She was pacing now, a caged animal. "I grew up watching her. I watched her get the pony I always wanted. The trips to Europe, the Ivy League education, the perfect storybook wedding to a handsome fool like you. She got everything. And my mother got an early grave from exhaustion. So, all of this, Mark said, gesturing around the room. It was revenge. It wasn't revenge, Camilla whispered, her eyes shining with unshed tears. It was justice. I wanted her to know what it felt like. I wanted to take her perfect life, her perfect house, her perfect husband, and even her perfect baby. And I wanted to burn it to the ground, just like her father did to my mother. Mark stared at her, horrified. He wasn't a partner in an affair. He was a weapon in a decades-old war he knew nothing about. He was collateral damage. You're insane, he breathed. I'm thorough, she corrected. And you were the easiest mark I've ever seen. So desperate to believe you were desirable, so eager to believe your pregnant wife was the problem. You didn't just fail her, Mark. You failed yourself. Jessica came down the stairs carrying 2 velvet-lined bags. We're done here. Officers, thank you. As the officers escorted Jessica out, Camilla and Mark were left alone in the grand foyer. So what now? He asked, his voice hollow. Camilla finally looked defeated. The fight was gone, replaced by a vast, empty void. Now, I suppose you go give your little bastard a DNA test. And I call a lawyer. A better one than you have. She walked past him, grabbed her purse, and without a backward glance, walked out the front door, leaving Mark Jensen utterly, finally, and completely alone in the wreckage of a life he had so carelessly destroyed. The maternity ward at St. Jude's was aggressively cheerful, with walls painted in soft yellows and murals of cartoon animals. To Mark, it felt like a Technicolor hell. He was escorted by a court officer to a small private waiting room. He hadn't seen Sarah yet. At 9:05 a.m., the door opened. Maria Sanchez. Sarah's lawyer entered, followed by a lab technician pushing a cart, and Sarah. She was holding a small, blue-wrapped bundle. Mark's breath caught. Sarah looked different. She was pale with dark circles under her eyes, but she wasn't the weeping, broken woman he had kicked out. She stood tall, her gaze steady and cold as Arctic ice. She looked at him not with hate or even sadness, but with a flat, clinical disinterest. Then he looked at the bundle. He saw a tiny sleeping face, a tuft of dark hair. Mark Jensen, Maria said, her voice sharp and formal. This is Leo Riley Jensen. As per the court order, a technician from St. Jude's Diagnostic Lab is here to collect your sample. Mark couldn't tear his eyes from the baby. His son. The resemblance, even from across the room, was staggering. It was like looking at his own baby picture. "Sarah," he whispered, taking a step forward. "Don't," Sarah said. Her voice was quiet, but it cut him to the quick. "Don't you dare speak to me. Look at the technician." Numb, ashamed, Mark turned. The technician, a kind-faced woman, gave him a sympathetic look. "Sir, if you could just open your mouth. I just need to swab your cheek." He complied. The process took 10 seconds. The technician sealed the swab in a vial, labeled it, and then motioned to Sarah. "Mrs. Jensen, the baby." Sarah gently pulled back Leo's blanket, and using another sterile swab, rubbed the inside of her son's tiny cheek. Leo squirmed, but didn't wake. The technician sealed that vial as well. "Thank you. The samples will be run through our own lab with full chain of custody. The results are legally binding and will be ready by 2 p.m. "We will wait," Maria said. "Here," Mark asked, his voice cracking. "For 5 hours." "You will," Maria stated. "Sarah and her son will be in her private room. You will remain here with the court officer to ensure there is no question of impropriety. You wanted a test, Mark. Now you're going to get one." The next 5 hours were torture. He sat on a plastic chair, the cheerful yellow walls mocking him. He replayed every moment of the last 2 months. Camila's casual touches, her concerns about Sarah, her discovery of the fake test, and his own eagerness to believe it. The petty grievances about Sarah being too tired or too focused on the baby. He hadn't been a victim. He'd been an accomplice. At 2:15 p.m., the door opened again. Maria Sanchez returned holding a single sealed manila envelope. The lab technician was with her. Sarah was not. "The results are in," Maria said, sitting opposite him. The court officer stood by the door. She opened the envelope and pulled out a single sheet of paper. She read it silently, her expression unreadable. Then she slid it across the table to him. It was a complex-looking document full of genetic markers and statistical analysis, but he only saw the bottom line. Donor Jensen, Mark T. Child. Jensen, Leo R. Probability of paternity. %. Conclusion. Mark T. Jensen is not excluded as the biological father of the child. Leo R. Jensen. Mark stared at the words, his vision blurring. He had known from the moment he saw Leo, but this was the black and white confirmation of his monstrous, unforgivable sin. He put his head in his hands and broke. It wasn't a dignified cry. It was a raw, guttural sob that tore from the deepest part of his soul. He had done this. He had thrown his son out into the rain. He had abandoned his wife at her most vulnerable. "So," Maria said, her voice clinical, "we have established paternity." She placed another much thicker stack of papers on the table. "This," she said, "is the lawsuit I mentioned. We are suing you, your mother Emma Jensen and Camila Roberts. Yes, we know her real name for conspiracy to commit fraud, forgery, intentional infliction of emotional distress, and illegal eviction. We are petitioning for full and sole custody of Leo, with supervised visitation for you at Sarah's discretion. We are reclaiming the Ashworth property free and clear as it was purchased with a fraudulent loan you took out against her inherited asset. We are seizing all shared bank accounts which you illegally drained, and we are petitioning for punitive damages." She stood up. "By the time we are done with you, Mark, you will not have a penny to your name. You will have this house and nothing else to show for your fresh start." Mark looked up, his face streaked with tears. I want to see her. I want to see Sarah. Please. I need to apologize. I need to explain. Explain what? Maria scoffed. That you're a gullible fool, that you were tricked. It doesn't matter. You made your choice. Please, he begged. I need to see my son. Maria paused, looking at the broken man in front of her. She doesn't have to see you, but she said you would ask. She's in room 308. You have 5 minutes. He scrambled to his feet, wiping his face on his sleeve, and ran down the hall. The officer followed, but stayed at the door. He pushed open the door to room 308. Sarah was sitting in a chair by the window, breastfeeding Leo. The scene was so peaceful, so maternal, it was like a knife in his gut. She looked up. Her eyes were hard. Sarah, he choked out, stumbling into the room. I saw the report. I'm so sorry, Sarah, I'm so sorry, I didn't know. She lied. Her name is Camila Roberts. Her father was... She did it all as revenge. He was babbling the words, falling over each other. Sarah just watched him, her expression unchanging. When he finally fell silent, his shoulders shaking, she spoke. You're right, she said, her voice low and clear. She lied. Yes, he said, desperate. You see, I was... And you, she interrupted, believed her. You didn't just not know Mark. You chose not to know. You chose to believe a piece of paper from a fake lab over the woman you built a life with. You chose to believe a stranger over the mother of your child. She adjusted Leo in her arms, who was now sleeping. You didn't just make a mistake, Mark. You were cruel. You were gleeful. You threw me out. You let her wear my clothes, sleep in my bed, throw out my son's crib. You tried to erase me. You tried to erase him. I can fix this, he pleaded, taking a step closer. We can. We're still a family. Sarah laughed. It was a bitter, broken sound. A family, no, Mark. We are not a family. You and I are two people who are legally bound by this child, that's all. You didn't just break my trust. You incinerated it. It's gone. So what happens now? Now, Sarah said, standing up, her strength radiating from her. I am going home. To my house. You will go to your mother's or a hotel. I don't care. Your lawyers will talk to my lawyers. You will pay support for your son. And if I am feeling generous, you will get to see him for 1 hour on a Saturday in a public place, with Jessica present. Sarah, please. He's my son. I love him. You don't get to, she said, her voice a devastating whisper. You gave up that right when you called him a bastard and threw his mother onto the street. You wanted the DNA report, Mark. You got it. The report doesn't just tell you that Leo is your son. It tells you in no uncertain terms who you are. You're a weak man, a cruel man, and you are a stranger to me. She walked past him, her head held high, carrying their son. You have 5 minutes to leave the room, she said, not looking back. And then I am having you removed. Mark stood alone in the empty hospital room, the smell of baby powder and antiseptic in the air. He had the DNA report clutched in his hand, the one single undeniable truth. And he had nothing else. The fallout was not a single explosion. It was a slow, agonizing demolition. Mark, as per the restraining order, was forced to move into his mother's spare bedroom, a humiliating regression to his teenage years. Emma, named in the lawsuit, was apoplectic. Her social standing was in tatters, and her savings were being drained by lawyers. She turned her venom on Mark, her disappointing, idiotic son, and their home became a cold war of bitter silences and seething resentment. Camila Roberts' story, however, was far more public. Once Sarah's legal team filed the complaint, Detailing the long con revenge plot, the story was leaked to the press. The Ashworth Avenger, one tabloid called her. The sins of the father. But the law was less romantic. The evidence of fraud, forgery, and conspiracy was overwhelming. The invoices from Digitalis Creative, the testimony from the PI she'd hired, the bank records showing Mark transferring huge sums of money to her accounts, it painted a picture of a deeply malicious and criminal enterprise. Facing a long prison sentence, Camilla took a plea deal. She was found guilty of multiple counts of fraud and forgery and was sentenced to 4 years in a state facility. Mark saw her one last time at the sentencing. She looked small, pale, and utterly defeated, her fiery hair lank and dull. She never once looked at him. For Mark, the punishment was financial and spiritual. Sarah's legal team, led by Maria Sanchez, was relentless. The court ruled that Mark had acted in bad faith and under fraudulent pretenses. The house on Ashworth Drive was returned to Sarah, her name restored as the sole owner. Mark was not only not bought out, he was ordered to pay for the damages and renovations Camilla had inflicted. The lawsuit decimated him. He lost his share of their joint assets. His investment firm, catching wind of his gross personal misconduct, forced him to resign. He was financially and professionally ruined. He was left with nothing but his court-ordered child support payments and his 1 hour of supervised visitation per week. His first visit was at a public park. Sarah wasn't there. Jessica was sitting on a nearby bench, her eyes never leaving him. Leo was 2 months old, bundled in a stroller. Mark, his hands shaking, picked him up. The baby stirred, opened his eyes. Mark's eyes, and looked at him with simple, uncomplicated recognition. Mark's chest ached. He held his son, this perfect tiny human, and felt the full, crushing weight of his loss. He hadn't just lost a house, or money, or a wife. He had lost this. He had lost the first 2 months. He had lost the right to be here. He had lost the right to be Dad. He was Mark, the 1 hour a week visitor. He looked over at Jessica, who was watching him with cold neutrality. She's really not going to, he started. No, Jessica said, not unkindly but firmly. She's not. Don't ask again. Just be his dad for the hour you've got. Mark turned back to his son, a hot, shameful tear rolling down his cheek and splashing onto Leo's blanket. Hi, Leo, he whispered. I'm your father, and I am so sorry. Sarah, meanwhile, was rebuilding. The first few months were a blur of diapers, 3 a.m. feedings, and lawyers. But the house, once a prison of betrayal, slowly became a sanctuary again. With Jessica's help, she boxed up every trace of Mark and Camilla. She repainted the nursery in bright, cheerful colors. She sold the cold, modern furniture Camilla had bought, and piece by piece restored the warmth her grandfather had intended for the home. She was not the same woman. The soft, trusting girl was gone, replaced by a mother made of steel. Her focus was singular Leo. He was her whole world, and she would protect him fiercely. About a year later, she was at the park with Leo pushing him on the swings when she saw Mark. It was not his day. He was standing by his car, a modest sedan, looking thin and gray. He saw her. He didn't approach. He just watched. Sarah, holding her son, met his gaze. There was no hatred in her eyes anymore. There was no anger. There was nothing. He was just a man she used to know. Mark understood. The final report, the real DNA test, wasn't the paper from the lab. It was this moment. It was the unbridgeable chasm between them. It was the life he could have had, the sound of his son's laughter, the warmth of his wife's smile, and the empty, silent one he had chosen. He got in his car and drove away. Sarah turned back to her son, who was reaching for her, his face split in a gummy, joyful grin. She lifted him into the air, her heart full. "That's right, my little lion," she whispered, kissing his forehead. "It's just you and me, and we are more than enough." Sarah's story is a brutal reminder that the deepest betrayals often come from the people we trust the most. She lost her husband, her home, and her security, all because of a devastating lie. But in that darkness, she found her strength. She fought back not for the man who betrayed her, but for the child she loved. She proved that the truth will come out, and that a person's real character, their real DNA, is revealed not in a lab, but in the choices they make under pressure. What did you think of Camila's twisted revenge plot? Was Mark a victim, or did he get exactly what he deserved? Let me know your thoughts in the comments below. If this story moved you, please hit that like button and share it with someone who needs to hear a story of survival. And don't forget to subscribe to the channel for more true-life stories of drama, betrayal, and ultimately justice. Thank you for listening.
Have you ever felt invisible in your own life? Have you ever been looked at by the one person who is supposed to love you only for their eyes to slide right past you, as if you were part of the furniture? This is the story of Catherine Davenport, a woman who wasn't just overlooked, but openly mocked for her quiet existence. It's a story about a cruel laugh in a high-end boutique, a laugh that was meant to break her. But instead, it ignited a fire. Get ready, because you are about to witness how a single moment of public humiliation became the catalyst for one of the most breathtaking comebacks imaginable, culminating in a tidal wave of camera flashes that would drown the man who took her for granted. Catherine Davenport existed in a world of quiet precision. Her domain was one of clean lines, structural integrity, and the elegant interplay of light and space. As a partner at the prestigious architectural firm Stratton Pearce and Davenport, her name was whispered with reverence in circles that discussed cantilevered balconies and sustainable urban planning. She could command a boardroom of engineers with a soft-spoken directive, her mind a fortress of calculations and artistic vision. Her latest project, the sweeping minimalist design for the new wing of the Metropolitan Museum of Modern Art, was already being hailed as a masterpiece of form and function. At home, however, her precision dissolved into a comfortable, almost invisible softness. The sprawling penthouse overlooking Central Park, a property her husband Jonathan Alderwood had acquired in a hostile takeover, was his stage, not hers. Jonathan was a titan of private equity, a man whose charisma was as legendary as his ruthlessness. He moved through the world with a golden glow, his suits impeccably tailored, his smile a weapon, his life a curated series of acquisitions, companies, properties, and some whispered people. In the early years of their marriage, Catherine had been his most prized acquisition. He'd been fascinated by her quiet intellect, her sharp mind, a refreshing contrast to the vapid socialites he usually dated. He loved telling the story of how they met, how she'd corrected a renowned physicist on the load-bearing capacity of a steel alloy during a dinner party. He'd been smitten, but years of fascination had curdled into a comfortable neglect. Jonathan had conquered her world, and now he was bored. His attention, like his capital, was always seeking the next big, shiny thing. Catherine, in her simple cashmere sweaters, her well-worn but comfortable loafers, and her hair often tied back with a stray pencil, was no longer shiny. She was familiar. She was the foundation of the house, essential but unseen. The silence in their home had become an entity in itself. It was in the space between them, on the king-size bed, in the way his phone would light up with texts at 2 a.m. that he would answer with a curt, single-thumbed reply, and in the way his compliments had shifted from her mind to her utility. "Catherine, could you look over this prospectus?" had replaced "Catherine, you look beautiful." She poured herself into her work, finding solace in the unwavering logic of blueprints and the tangible reality of concrete and steel. Her clothes were a reflection of this focus. She preferred practicality. Dark wash jeans, silk blouses, in muted tones of grey and navy, a single elegant watch her father had given her. She had no time or inclination for the frivolous, competitive sport of high fashion that seemed to consume the women in Jonathan's circle. Why spend thousands on a dress you could only wear once when she could invest in a rare first edition book on Japanese joinery? The distance became a chasm the day Jonathan announced the annual Alderwood Foundation Gala. It was the crown jewel of his philanthropic efforts, a night where New York's elite paid exorbitant sums to mingle and be seen. "It's at the Grand Ballroom this year," he said, not looking up from his tablet as he scrolled through market reports. "I need you to be there, of course. It's important for the brand." The brand. Not for us. Not, "I'd love for you to be by my side." She felt a familiar dull ache in her chest. "Of course, Jonathan. I'll clear my schedule." "Good," he mumbled. A moment later, his face softened slightly. "And maybe, get something new, something special." He finally looked at her, his gaze sweeping over her comfortable grey sweater and jeans, with a flicker of something she couldn't quite name. It wasn't malice, it was worse. It was appraisal, and she was coming up short. "I'll see what I can do," she said, her voice betraying none of the cold dread that was beginning to seep into her bones. She knew he wasn't just suggesting it. It was a directive from the CEO of their marriage, and she was a non-compliant asset. The boutique was an explosion of clinical, white and rose gold. Garments hung like fragile works of art, each with more empty space around it than a masterpiece in a gallery. The air hummed with a low electronic beat and smelled of expensive perfume and quiet judgment. Catherine felt like an intruder, a sparrow that had accidentally flown into a sterile laboratory. She clutched the strap of her worn leather satchel, a bag that had accompanied her to construction sites and client meetings across the globe, and which now seemed comically out of place. She had tried. Following Jonathan's suggestion, she had dedicated an afternoon to finding a suitable dress for the gala. But as she browsed the racks of shimmering architectural gowns, nothing felt right. They felt like costumes for a person she wasn't. The sales associates floated around her, their smiles tight, their eyes assessing her plain attire with a professional dismissiveness that was more cutting than any overt insult. Deciding to clear her head, she left the store and was walking down Madison Avenue when she saw him. Jonathan. He was standing outside a rival boutique, one known for its audacious and scandalously priced European designs. He was laughing, his head tilted back in that way he did when he was truly charmed. And on his arm, draped like a priceless silk scarf, was Victoria Beaumont. Victoria was a social media influencer, a woman whose entire career was built on being the next shiny thing. Her face, a symphony of fillers and expert contouring, was plastered across Instagram feeds, promoting everything from detox teas to diamond watches. She was everything Catherine was not: loud, colourful, and utterly performatively public. Catherine's first instinct was to turn to retreat, back into the anonymous flow of the New York crowd. But she was frozen, rooted to the pavement. It was the same feeling as watching a demolition, a horrifying fascination with the inevitable collapse. Jonathan hadn't seen her. He was holding up a shockingly bright fuchsia dress against Victoria, who was preening in the reflection of the boutique window. It was then that Catherine made a small, involuntary movement, perhaps a shift of her weight that caught Victoria's eye in the glass. Victoria's perfectly painted lips curled into a smirk. She whispered something to Jonathan, her eyes still locked on Catherine's reflection. Jonathan turned. The colour drained from his face, his charming smile vanishing like a wiped slate. He looked like a child, caught with his hand in the most expensive forbidden cookie jar in the world. Catherine stood her ground. Her heart was a jackhammer against her ribs, but her expression remained a placid mask of neutrality. She had perfected intense negotiations. Victoria, however, saw an opportunity. She let go of Jonathan's arm and sauntered towards Catherine, her stiletto heels clicking a predatory rhythm on the sidewalk. She looked Catherine up and down, a slow, deliberate appraisal that was designed to strip her bare. Her eyes lingered on Catherine's sensible trench coat, her practical jeans, and her comfortable loafers. Then she laughed. It wasn't a small chuckle. It was a loud, theatrical peal of derision that turned the heads of passers-by. "Oh, my God!" she gasped, placing a manicured hand over her mouth, though it did nothing to muffle the sound. "Jonathan, darling, you didn't tell me we were sponsoring a clothing drive for the less fortunate today." The words hung in the air, sharp and poisonous. People were stopping now, their phones subtly rising. They recognized Jonathan Alderwood. They recognized Victoria Beaumont. And they saw the plainly dressed woman caught in the crossfire. Catherine looked at her husband, waiting. This was the moment for him to step in to defend her, to draw a line. Jonathan took a half step forward, his mouth opening and closing silently. He looked from Catherine's stony face to Victoria's mocking one. He saw the phones, he felt the stares. He was a man who lived and died by public perception. "Victoria, please," he said, but his voice was weak, placating. It was a plea, not a command. There was no anger in it, no protective fury. There was only the quiet panic of a man whose two worlds had just collided in the most public and damaging way possible. Victoria took his weakness as a victory. She leaned in conspiratorially towards Catherine, her voice a stage whisper that carried down the block. "A little advice, honey. A man like Jonathan needs a woman who reflects his success, not someone who looks like she shops at a thrift store. No offense." She winked, then turned and looped her arm back through Jonathan's, pulling him towards the entrance of the boutique. "Come on, darling. Let's find me something truly fabulous for your big night." Jonathan cast one last agonized look back at his wife. He saw the utter stillness in her eyes, a frighteningly calm sea before a tsunami. He saw the faint, almost imperceptible nod she gave him, a nod not of forgiveness, but of acknowledgement, an acknowledgement of a truth that had finally been spoken aloud. He hesitated for a second more, then allowed himself to be pulled into the bright, sterile world of the boutique, leaving his wife alone on the sidewalk, surrounded by the whispers and the stares, the echo of that cruel laughter ringing in the cold city air. For a long moment, Catherine didn't move. She simply stood there, a statue of discarded dignity. Then she took a deep, shuddering breath. The humiliation was a physical thing, a hot, coiling serpent in her gut. But beneath it, something else was stirring. Not sadness, not despair. It was a cold, hard, and utterly lucid rage. It was the feeling of a master architect looking at a condemned building, just before she draws up the plans for something new, something magnificent, to rise from the rubble. She turned, not towards the safety of her quiet apartment, but in the opposite direction, and pulled out her phone. Her fingers steady as a surgeon's scrolled to a single name, a name she hadn't called in years. The person Catherine called was Sophia Reynard. Sophia was not merely a friend, she was a force of nature. An art gallery owner with a razor-sharp wit and a wardrobe that could intimidate dictators, she had been Catherine's staunchest ally since their university days. While Catherine built structures of steel, Sophia built careers for avant-garde artists, both of them operating as formidable, albeit very different architects of culture. "Sophia," Catherine's voice was unnaturally calm when the call connected. Kat, to what do I owe the pleasure? Did you finally decide to let me bulldoze that ghastly bronze fountain Jonathan installed in your lobby? Sophia's voice was a rich alto, always laced with a playful sarcasm. Something like that, Catherine replied, the ice in her tone finally cracking, allowing a tremor of emotion to come through. I need your help. It's personal. The shift in her friend's voice was immediate. Where are you? Tell me everything. Do I need to post bail? Catherine found a small quiet park bench and sank onto it. The city's frantic energy, a stark contrast to the sudden desolate stillness within her. She recounted the entire scene on Madison Avenue, her voice low and steady, narrating the events with the dispassionate clarity of an architect describing a structural failure. She left out no detail. Victoria's sneer, the specific shade of fuchsia of the dress, the weakness in Jonathan's voice, the laughter, especially the laughter. On the other end of the line, there was a profound silence. When Sophia finally spoke, her voice was stripped of all its usual levity. It was dangerously quiet. That man, she began the words clipped and precise, has been living off the dividends of your quiet brilliance for 15 years. That vapid injected little troll he's parading around is a symptom, not the disease. The disease is his monumental, breathtaking cowardice. A single tear traced a path down Catherine's cheek, the first she had allowed to fall. He didn't even defend me, Soph. He just stood there. Because he's not a partner, Kat. He's a brand manager, and his brand was at risk, Sophia said, her anger simmering. All right, no more tears. We're past that. We are now in the operational phase. What is the objective? Catherine wiped her cheek with the back of her hand. The chill was returning, but this time it felt different. It felt like purpose. The Alderwood Gala is in 2 weeks. He expects me to be there. He expects me to wear something special. She practically spat the word. I don't want to just show up, Sophia. I want to make a statement so loud it will shatter glass. A slow smile spread across Sophia's face, a smile Catherine could feel even through the phone. Oh, darling, we're not going to shatter glass. We're going to build a cathedral around you, a monument to his catastrophic miscalculation. Sophia paused, her mind clearly racing. The usual suspects won't do. Not Chanel, not Dior, not Valentino. It's too predictable. It would look like you're trying to play their game. We need to change this game entirely. I know, Catherine said, her own plan nascent and terrifying, beginning to take shape. That's why I called you. Do you remember when I designed the renovation for the Musée du Bois in Paris 5 years ago? Sophia let out a low whistle. Of course. The glass atrium. It won every award under the sun. You spent months working with him. Him was Antoine Dubois. He was not just a designer. He was a living legend, a couturier who had transcended fashion to become a pure artist. His work was the stuff of museum retrospectives. He rarely dressed celebrities, considering them to be fleeting billboards. He dressed icons, artists, and royalty. He was notoriously reclusive, famously difficult, and operated on a plane of creative genius that made the likes of Victoria Beaumont seem like stick figures drawn in crayon. During the museum project, Antoine and Catherine had formed an unlikely bond. The temperamental, aging artist and the calm, logical architect found common ground in their shared obsession with line form and the soul of a structure, whether it was a building or a gown. They had spent long evenings debating the merits of brutalism versus Art Nouveau over glasses of Calvados in his private atelier. He respected her mind immensely, calling her La Architecte de la Lumière, the architect of light. You're not thinking, Sophia's voice was filled with a dawning, gleeful awe. He owes me a favor, Catherine said simply. When the city council tried to block the permit for the cantilevered terrace, I found a loophole in an 18th century zoning law that saved the entire design. He told me if I ever needed anything, I just had to ask. Catherine Davenport, you magnificent creature, Sophia breathed. This is beyond revenge. This is poetry. This is high art. What do you need from me? I need a flight to Paris, tonight, and I need you to run interference. If Jonathan calls, tell him I'm at a wellness retreat. A silent one. Tell him my phone is off. I need 2 weeks of absolute radio silence. Consider it done, Sophia said, the excitement palpable in her voice. I'll book your usual suite at Le Bristol. I'll have a car waiting for you at Charles de Gaulle. And Kat. Yes. When you call Antoine, don't ask him to make you a dress to get back at your husband. That's small. You're not small. Tell him you have an idea for a new structure, one that you'll be wearing. Catherine closed her eyes, a genuine smile touching her lips for the first time that day. Sophia understood. This wasn't just about a dress. It was about design. It was about creating a new facade, one that finally matched the strength of the interior framework. I will, she promised. Hanging up, she stood and walked out of the park, her stride no longer hesitant but purposeful. She was no longer just Catherine Davenport, the neglected wife. She was Catherine Davenport, the architect, and she was about to design her masterpiece. Paris in the autumn was a cliché for a reason. The city air was crisp, smelling of rain and roasting chestnuts, and the golden light made the limestone buildings glow. But Catherine wasn't there for the romance of it. She was on a mission. The hotel suite Sophia had booked was palatial, but she barely noticed the brocade furniture or the stunning view of the Eiffel Tower. She drank a single espresso, showered, and headed directly for a discreet, unmarked door on a quiet street just off the prestigious Rue Cambon. The atelier of Antoine Dubois was not a shop. It was a sanctuary. Inside there was no music, only the soft shushing of silk, the snip of shears, and the murmur of French from the seamstresses who moved with the quiet reverence of acolytes in a temple. The air smelled of fabric, hot irons, and strong coffee. Antoine Dubois himself emerged from a back room, looking exactly as she remembered, a shock of white hair piercing blue eyes behind stark black glasses and a black cashmere turtleneck that was his uniform. He was 70, but he moved with the restless energy of a man half his age. "Catherine," he said, his voice a gravelly baritone. He didn't smile, but his eyes held a flicker of warmth. He kissed her on both cheeks in the French tradition. "It has been too long. Paris has missed your eye. The atrium, she is still magnificent." "Antoine," she replied, feeling a sense of calm settle over her for the first time in days. "Thank you for seeing me on such short notice." "Nonsense. For the woman who saved my terrace from the bureaucrats, I would cancel a meeting with the Pope," he said, waving a dismissive hand. He led her to a small sitting area, 2 minimalist chairs surrounded by bolts of extraordinary fabrics. "Now, your message was cryptic. You have a new project, a structure to be worn. I am intrigued. Tell me everything." This was the moment. Following Sophia's advice, Catherine didn't begin with the story of Jonathan and Victoria. To do so would be to frame this masterpiece as a reaction, an object of revenge. Instead, she framed it as an artistic collaboration, an architectural problem she needed his help to solve. She opened her leather satchel, the same one Victoria had mocked, and pulled out, not a fashion magazine, but a slim portfolio. Inside were her own sketches. They weren't drawings of a dress, but architectural renderings. She showed him sketches of sweeping curves, inspired by the Guggenheim, the rigid, powerful lines of a skyscraper's frame, the delicate, intricate geometry of a geodesic dome. "I want to build something," she began, her voice gaining strength and passion. "A facade that is not a disguise, but a revelation. It needs the strength of steel, but the fluidity of light. It needs to command a room, not with vulgarity or color, but with its very structure. It should make people hold their breath, not because it is pretty, but because it is powerful." Antoine listened, his head cocked, his sharp eyes darting between her face and the sketches. He was utterly silent, taking in every word. He picked up one of her drawings, a detailed study of how fabric could be pleated and folded to mimic the supporting arches of a Gothic cathedral. He traced the lines with a long, elegant finger. "This is not fashion, Catherine," he said, his voice soft with wonder. "This is engineering. You are asking for armor." "Yes," she whispered, "that's exactly what it is." For the first time, he allowed a thin, rare smile to cross his lips. "And for what battle does this architect of light require armor?" Only then did she tell him. She told him the whole story, not with self-pity, but with the cold, hard facts of the matter. She spoke of the years of being overlooked, of her husband's casual cruelty, and of the raw public humiliation on Madison Avenue. She described the laughter that had been meant to diminish her, to fold her into nothingness. When she finished, Antoine was silent for a long time. He stood up and walked to a window overlooking the Parisian courtyard. "Men like your husband," he said, finally, his back still to her, "are fools. They are mesmerized by fireworks, so they ignore the beauty of the stars. They think strength is loud. They are wrong. Strength is quiet, precise and devastating when it chooses to be." He turned back to her, his eyes blazing with a newfound fire. "We will not make you a dress, Catherine. A dress is for attending an event. We will create what you asked for, a structure. And when you walk into that room, you will not be attending the event. You will be the event." The next 10 days were a blur of intense creative energy. The project consumed the entire atelier. Antoine cleared his schedule. He and Catherine worked side by side, a collaboration of two masters from different fields. He would drape a bolt of a unique custom-milled silk metal alloy over a mannequin, and she would adjust the fold, explaining how it could better catch the light to create a more dramatic line, just as she would position a window to catch the morning sun. He taught her about the secret language of fabrics, how a certain weave could convey power, how a specific drape could suggest vulnerability or strength. She taught him about the psychological impact of space and form, how a high-structured collar could command authority, how a sweeping, unsupported train could create a sense of awe and untouchable grace. The material they chose was extraordinary. It was a deep, starless midnight blue, almost black, but woven with microfilaments of a silvery metal that gave it a subtle internal luminescence. In low light, it appeared muted, elegant, but when hit by a direct, bright light, like for instance a camera flash, it would ignite, exploding into a brilliant, shimmering field of starlight. The design itself was a marvel of architectural couturieri. It had a sculpted, asymmetrical bodice that rose to a sharp, elegant point on one shoulder, reminiscent of a skyscraper's peak. The waist was cinched, but the gown then fell away in a series of complex, origami-like folds that moved with a liquid grace, defying their own geometric precision. It was severe, yet sensual, minimalist, yet infinitely complex. It was Catherine Davenport rendered in fabric. On the final day, as she stood before the mirror, for her last fitting, the seamstresses silent around her, she saw not just a woman in a beautiful gown. She saw herself. She saw the quiet strength, the fierce intellect, the unwavering precision. The dress didn't hide her, it revealed her. Antoine stood beside her, observing her reflection. "There she is," he whispered. Not to her, but to the woman in the mirror. "L'architecte de la lumière." Catherine met his gaze in the reflection, a slow, determined smile spreading across her face. The armor was ready. It was time for battle. The grand ballroom of the Plaza Hotel was a symphony of excess. Crystal chandeliers, each the size of a small car, dripped light onto a sea of black tuxedos and jewel-toned gowns. The air was thick with the scent of expensive florals and the murmur of 1,000 conversations, all lubricated by vintage champagne that flowed like water. This was Jonathan Alderwood's kingdom, and he was holding court. He stood near the grand entrance, a radiant Victoria Beaumont plastered to his side. She was a vision in crimson, a dress by a trendy, flavor-of-the-month designer that was more bandage than fabric, leaving little to the imagination. A necklace of enormous diamonds, a recent gift from Jonathan, glittered at her throat. She was glowing triumphant. In her mind, she had won. The wife was tucked away at some sad little spa, and she, Victoria, was here on the arm of the king, being photographed, admired, and envied. Jonathan played his part to perfection. He smiled his million-dollar smile, shook hands with politicians and tech billionaires, and posed for the flashing cameras of the society pages. Yet a keen observer might have noticed a slight tension in his jaw, a furtive quality to his eyes as he occasionally scanned the crowd. Catherine's 2 weeks of silence had been unnerving. He'd expected frantic calls, tearful recriminations. Instead, there was nothing. Her assistant had stonewalled his calls with polite efficiency, repeating the silent wellness retreat story Sophia had concocted. It was out of character, and it pricked at his conscience, a dull, annoying throb he tried to drown with more champagne and Victoria's shallow flattery. "Isn't this just perfect, darling?" Victoria purred, adjusting her cleavage for a nearby photographer. "Everyone who's anyone is here, and they're all looking at us." "It's a good turnout for the foundation," Jonathan replied, his eyes once again drifting towards the entrance. He felt a ridiculous, nagging sense of guilt. He told himself it was just about appearances. Catherine's absence would be noted, and it would be awkward. Her presence in one of her usual drab outfits would also be awkward. There was no winning. He just wanted the night to be over. Robert Finch, a rival private equity CEO and a man whose respect Jonathan craved, approached them. Finch was old money, with a quiet, patrician air that made Jonathan's new money flashiness feel cheap. "Jonathan, Victoria," Finch said with a curt nod. "Quite the event. The foundation does good work." "Robert, glad you could make it," Jonathan said, clapping him on the back a little too forcefully. "You're looking well." Finch's eyes did a quick, dismissive scan of Victoria's dress before settling back on Jonathan. "Is Catherine joining you this evening? I was hoping to discuss her new museum wing. It's breathtaking. The woman is a genius." Jonathan's smile tightened. "She's feeling a bit under the weather. A shame, I know. She would have loved to be here." The lie tasted like ash in his mouth. Victoria, sensing a topic that didn't involve her, jumped in. "Oh, poor thing. She's probably resting up at home. It takes a lot of energy to, pick out a sensible cardigan," she said, with a little titter. Robert Finch's expression didn't change, but a distinct chill entered his eyes. He gave Victoria a look one might reserve for a piece of gum found on one's shoe, then turned his attention back to the ballroom. "Indeed," he said the single word, dripping with disdain. It was then that a subtle shift occurred at the entrance. The frenetic energy of the paparazzi pen outside, which had settled into a low hum, suddenly erupted. The flashes, which had been sporadic, became a constant, blinding strobe, a silent, violent lightning storm. The noise from the street filtered in a crescendo of shouted names and clicking shutters. Inside the ballroom, heads began to turn. The flow of conversation faltered as people craned their necks, trying to see what celebrity or royal had arrived to cause such a commotion. "Who on earth is that?" Victoria muttered, annoyed that the attention was no longer on her. Jonathan, too, stared at the entrance, a knot of inexplicable dread tightening in his stomach. He saw his head of security, a burly ex-Secret Service agent, speaking urgently into his wrist communicator, his eyes wide with a mixture of shock and confusion. The grand doors of the ballroom were held open by the hotel staff. The blinding wall of light from the paparazzi flashes silhouetted a lone figure. For a moment, it was impossible to make out any details, only the shape of a woman who stood, with an almost preternatural stillness, a calm island in a hurricane of light. Then she took a single step forward, moving from the backlit chaos into the softer golden glow of the ballroom's chandeliers, and the entire room fell silent. It was not an entrance. It was an unveiling. The woman who stepped into the grand ballroom was not someone they recognized. Not at first. The human brain struggles to reconcile the familiar with the extraordinary, and this vision was so far removed from their mental image of Catherine Davenport that a collective short circuit occurred. The gown was the first thing they processed. It wasn't a dress. It was a living sculpture. The midnight blue, almost black fabric drank the ambient light of the chandeliers, creating an effect of infinite depth, like staring into a clear night sky. The structure of it was breathtaking. The severe, elegant peak on her shoulder, the geometric folds that cascaded down her form, moving with the impossible grace of liquid metal. She wore no necklace, no ostentatious jewels. Her only adornments were a pair of simple diamond stud earrings and a confidence that was more dazzling than any gemstone. Her hair, usually in a practical knot, was styled in a sleek, severe chignon that highlighted the elegant column of her neck and the sharp intelligence of her features. Her makeup was minimal but transformative, emphasizing the high cheekbones and determined set of her jaw that had always been there, but that Jonathan had long ago stopped seeing. Then, as she took another step, a photographer from inside the event raised his camera and took a picture. The flash went off, and the universe tilted on its axis. The dress exploded with light. The custom-woven fabric caught the flash and ignited, transforming from a deep, quiet blue into a blazing constellation of silver starlight. For a split second, she was not a woman in a gown, but a figure sculpted from a captured galaxy. The effect was so sudden, so beautiful, and so utterly unexpected that a collective gasp swept through the ballroom. It was in that flash of brilliant, shimmering light that they finally saw her. It was Catherine. But it was a version of Catherine they had never known existed. This was not the quiet, sensible wife. This was a queen, an empress. This was the architect finally inhabiting a structure of her own design. Jonathan Alderwood froze. The champagne flute in his hand felt impossibly heavy. The blood drained from his face, leaving him a pallid, sickly grey. It was a visceral, full-body shock, a neurological event that severed the connection between his brain and his limbs. All the sound in the room, the whispers that were now starting to erupt, the frantic clicks of the internal photographers faded into a dull, roaring buzz in his ears. He saw her, but he didn't comprehend her. His mind was scrambling, trying to fit this impossible image into the comfortable, dismissive box where he had kept his wife for the last decade. The box was shattering. He remembered her on the sidewalk, her face a calm mask of humiliation. He remembered Victoria's cruel, ringing laughter. And he looked at this celestial being who was gliding into his ballroom, commanding the attention of every single person in it, and he felt a primal, gut-wrenching terror. This was not a makeover. This was a resurrection, and he was standing on the wrong side of the grave. Beside him, Victoria was a statue of disbelief and sputtering rage. Her perfectly constructed mask of superiority was cracking, revealing the raw, ugly insecurity beneath. Her crimson dress, which had seemed so bold and daring moments before, now looked cheap, garish, and desperate. Her diamonds looked like glass. She was a firecracker next to a supernova. What? Who? How did she? Victoria stammered, her voice a strangled whisper. Her eyes wide with a furious envy darted around the room, seeing that every gaze, every phone camera, every ounce of attention was now fixed on Catherine. Victoria Beaumont had just become invisible. Catherine didn't look at them. Not yet. She moved with a slow, deliberate grace, her expression serene, almost regal. She was not looking for her husband. She was not scanning the crowd for reactions. Her gaze was fixed forward, as if she were walking towards a predetermined point, a future she had already designed. The whispers grew into a roar. Is that Catherine Davenport? My God, what is she wearing? It's incredible. Who is the designer? I've never seen anything like it. She looks powerful. Robert Finch, standing a few feet away, watched the scene unfold with a slow, appreciative smile. He looked over at Jonathan's ashen face, then at the incandescent vision of his wife, and gave a single, almost imperceptible nod of respect. He understood. This was not a wife making her husband jealous. This was a checkmate. And still, Catherine walked each step a silent indictment, a graceful, shimmering hammer. Blow against the gilded cage Jonathan had built around her. The cameras flashed again, and with each burst of light, she burned brighter, a star being born in the wreckage of a forgotten marriage. She was heading towards the center of the room, and Jonathan knew with a certainty that chilled him to the bone that he would have to go to her. He would have to cross the floor of his own gala, through the stares and whispers of his peers, and face the stranger his wife had become. Jonathan felt as though he were wading through cement. Every eye in the room was on him, tracking his slow, hesitant journey toward the radiant figure in the center of the floor. Victoria tried to grab his arm, a desperate claw-like gesture. "Jonathan, don't just leave me here," she hissed, her voice shrill with panic. He shook her off without a second thought, his entire being focused on the woman who was his wife. As he approached, Catherine finally turned her head and looked at him. Her eyes were not angry. They were not hurt. They were calm, clear, and appraising, with the cool detachment of an architect inspecting a faulty structure. The look stripped him bare more effectively than any screaming match could have. "Catherine," he managed to say, his voice hoarse. You look..." Words failed him. Beautiful was too small. Stunning was inadequate. "I'm glad you think so," she replied, her voice even and measured. It was her voice, but imbued with a new resonance, a new authority. "Although I wasn't aware my appearance was of such great concern to you." The polite, cutting remark landed with the precision of a scalpel. Jonathan flinched. "Where have you been? I was worried." A small, humorless smile touched her lips. Were you worried about how my absence would look?" She didn't wait for an answer. She let the question hang in the air between them, a testament to the truth they both knew. Before he could formulate a response, they were surrounded. But the people converging on them were not the usual society gossips. It was Robert Finch, followed by a consortium of the city's most powerful arts patrons, museum curators, and most surprisingly, a well-known journalist from the New York Times, pen and notepad in hand. "Catherine, my dear," Robert Finch said, completely ignoring Jonathan, "that is not a gown, it is a statement. I must know who is the artist." Catherine's smile became genuine, warm, and utterly dazzling. She turned to the small elite group that had gathered. "The artist," she said, her voice carrying clearly, in the now hushed circle, "is Monsieur Antoine Dubois." A collective intake of breath. The name Dubois was legendary, mythical. For him to create a custom piece for a private citizen was unheard of. But, Catherine continued, holding their rapt attention, he had a collaborator. The journalist, a sharp woman named Helen Shaw, leaned in. A collaborator. It was at that moment that a distinguished white-haired man stepped forward from the edge of the crowd. Jonathan vaguely recognized him, but couldn't place him. Catherine, however, turned to him with a radiant smile. It was Antoine Dubois himself, having flown in from Paris that afternoon, his presence the final, masterfully planned piece of the evening. "Monsieur Dubois," Catherine said, inclining her head. "Madame Davenport," he replied, taking her hand and kissing the air above it. "Or should I say, my new partner." Jonathan's blood turned to ice. Partner Catherine addressed the mesmerized group, her voice ringing with a newfound, unshakable confidence. "Monsieur Dubois and I found that we share a common philosophy about the intersection of structure and art. We are therefore thrilled to use tonight to announce the launch of our new joint venture, Dubois Davenport Structures." She paused, letting the bombshell land. This gown is not from a new collection. It is the first piece. Our venture will be a design house that applies the principles of architecture to wearable art and the principles of couture to small-scale architectural projects. We will be creating limited edition objects, bespoke private installations, and yes, a handful of select garments for discerning clients who believe as we do that what you inhabit, be it a room or a piece of clothing, should be a work of art. The circle erupted in excited murmurs. This wasn't a society wife's makeover. This was a multi-million-dollar business launch, a fusion of two legendary talents from different worlds. It was brilliant, audacious, and completely unexpected. Helen Shaw, the journalist, was scribbling furiously. She looked up, her eyes gleaming with the thrill of a major story. She turned her attention to the stunned, silent figure standing beside the new titan. "Mr. Alderwood," she called out, her voice sharp and professional. "What an incredible announcement. As the husband of the co-founder and a prominent investor yourself, what are your thoughts on this groundbreaking partnership between your wife and Monsieur Dubois? When did this visionary project begin?" The cameras flashed, all of them, now pointed directly at Jonathan's pale, sweat-slicked face. He was trapped. He stared at Catherine, at the woman he had dismissed, mocked, and cheated on. He saw her standing there, not as his wife, but as the CEO of a new and powerful enterprise he knew absolutely nothing about. She had not only rebuilt herself, she had built an empire in secret and unveiled it on his stage at his party, stealing the spotlight so completely that his own foundation was now a mere footnote. He opened his mouth, but no sound came out. He was a master of words, of persuasion, of control. And in that moment, he had none. The flashbulbs were like gunshots, and he was the target. The laughter he heard now was not Victoria's, but the sound of his own world, his own arrogance crashing down around him in a spectacular starlit blaze of glory. He was completely, utterly frozen, a statue of obsolescence next to a woman who had just revealed herself to be the future. The fallout from the Alderwood Foundation Gala was swift and brutal. The next morning, it wasn't Jonathan's philanthropic endeavors on the front page of the New York Times style and business sections. It was a full-page, stunning photograph of Catherine, the gown blazing with light under the headline, "The Architect and the Alchemist Davenport and Dubois Reimagined Design." Helen Shaw's article painted Catherine as a visionary genius, a quiet force who had finally stepped into the spotlight on her own terms. Jonathan was mentioned only once in passing as her financier husband. His phone began ringing at 6 a.m. and did not stop. His investors called not to congratulate him on the gala, but to ask for an introduction to his wife. His board members called, their voices laced with an unnerving mixture of awe for Catherine and implied disappointment in him for being so utterly blindsided. His carefully managed brand had been hijacked. He had hosted an event to celebrate his own power, and his wife had emerged as the true Tan in the room. Victoria Beaumont vanished from his life like smoke. Publicly humiliated and instantly irrelevant, she sent a volley of furious, misspelled texts before blocking his number. Her 15 minutes of fame had expired in a single brilliant camera flash. Jonathan barely registered her departure. She was a symptom of a disease he now realized he was riddled with, a profound and catastrophic blindness. He found Catherine 2 days later, not at their penthouse, which he had already arranged to have her personal belongings packed and moved from, but on the top floor of a skyscraper in the meat-packing district. It was an empty, raw commercial space with floor-to-ceiling windows offering a panoramic view of the city she helped build. Architectural drawings were laid out on a makeshift table in the center of the room. This was the new headquarters of Dubois Davenport Structures. She was dressed simply in black trousers and a soft grey cashmere sweater, looking every bit the woman he had known. And yet she was a complete stranger. She didn't look up when he entered. "Catherine, we need to talk," he began, his voice strained. "There's nothing to talk about, Jonathan," she said, making a neat annotation on a blueprint. Nothing to talk about. You humiliated me. You planned this whole thing behind my back. She finally looked up, and her calm, steady gaze made him feel like a petulant child. No, Jonathan. You humiliated me. Publicly and repeatedly over many years. You just didn't notice because you weren't looking. What I did was not about you. It was about me. This, she gestured around the empty space, is me reclaiming my own narrative. The fact that it coincided with your public relations event is just efficient. He deflated the anger draining out of him, leaving only a hollow ache. I'm sorry, Kat, for everything, for Victoria, for what happened on the street. I was a fool, a coward. I love you. The words which he had once used to win her over now sounded thin and desperate. You love the idea of me, she corrected him gently. You loved the intelligent, respectable wife who made you look good in the right circles, but didn't outshine you. The woman you saw at the gala, she excites you, but you don't love her. You don't even know her, because you never took the time to. She stood up and walked to the vast window, looking out at the city skyline. I spent 15 years as a supporting beam in your structure, Jonathan. I was content with that for a long time. But foundations need to be respected. When you let that woman laugh at me, and you stood there and did nothing, you proved that my foundation was cracked. And an architect. She turned to face him, her eyes clear and resolute. Knows that you can't build anything lasting on a cracked foundation. You have to tear it down and start over. Giovanni saw the finality in her eyes. There was no room for negotiation. The blueprints on the table weren't just for a new business. They were for a new life, a life that did not include him. He left without another word. There were none left to say. Catherine watched him go, feeling not triumph, not even sadness, but a sense of quiet, profound peace. She was no longer defined by a penthouse. She didn't choose a husband who didn't see her, or a life lived in the shadows. She was defined by her work, her vision, her strength. She looked out the window at the city, at the buildings of steel and glass that reached for the sky. They were beautiful. They were powerful. And she, Catherine Davenport, was one of them. She picked up her pencil and turned back to the blueprints ready to build. Catherine's story isn't just about revenge. It's a powerful reminder that our true value is never determined by someone else's opinion. It's about the moment we stop waiting for others to see our worth and decide to build a stage of our own. She transformed an act of deep humiliation into the foundation of a new empire, not with anger, but with the brilliance she possessed all along. Her story teaches us that sometimes the most powerful statement isn't a loud shout, but the quiet, undeniable excellence of our own work. Have you ever felt underestimated or invisible in your own life? What hidden talents do you possess that the world just hasn't seen yet? Let us know in the comments below what your couture moment would look like. If Catherine's incredible journey from the shadows to the spotlight inspired you, please give this video a thumbs up, share it with someone who needs to hear this story, and don't forget to subscribe to our channel for more tales of epic transformations and ultimate justice. Click that notification bell so you never miss a story of someone reclaiming their power.